Is mental health first aid too little, too late for workplaces? I'm Samantha Thomas, founder of Embrace Life UK, and today's conversation is going to be around the question of mental health. And that will be the last thing we come on to. I'm going to be speaking to Danny Wareham. Danny is a business psychologist, coach, and speaker who uses psychology to create high-performing leaders and cultures and teams. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Danny. I'm going to let him explain a little bit about his background, tell you a bit about himself, and then we're going to go through a whole half hour of looking at values, aspirations, culture, big five and behaviour traits, having difficult conversations, the ABCDs and E's, which for me was amazing when I found out. I loved it. And then we'll answer the question around mental health first aid. Stay tuned. Enjoy.
Okay, thanks for having me, Samantha. So as you've mentioned, my name's Danny Wareham and I'm a psychologist, specifically a business psychologist, although I do have experience in clinical and forensic as well. And I kind of ended up here a little serendipitously, if that's a word. So my background has always been in big... It is a word, it's a word now. So my background's always been in big blue chip corporations, looking at things around employee engagement and culture. So I've got an experience of what works, but not really why it works and what the kind of theory and the academics would say around it. So when I left big corporate world, I went to university and did my master's just to partly validate myself because I've been in one environment for a long time, and also to learn more about I know what works, but what's the kind of nuts and bolts behind it, so I can make sure it's a sustainable changes that I'm doing with my clients. That's me in a nutshell.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So how did that bring you into, so if you started in one area, what was the catalyst for you that brought you into this area? Because you now run your own business, you've got your own website, you do all your own stuff. You're a lot like many entrepreneurs, you're multi-talented. We all build our own websites and do our own stuff and set up our own things nowadays. So we've got all these skills, but very little context sometimes around them. So yeah, exactly. So what brought you from where you were to actually where you are right at this moment?
A great question. I'd taken some time out after redundancy and I was doing some business coaching, and two separate clients said to me, why don't you just do this for yourself? Why don't you just become a kind of small business coach? And I like coaching. I love coaching. I still coach today, but I had a bit of a reflection and worked out what is the common thread through my life that really gets me out of bed. And it's always been setting the table for others. So if I have a barbecue, it's not about look how fantastic my food is. It's, is your glass full? Is the food okay for you? Is the temperature right? Is the music okay? In my sport, I play basketball. I'm a point guard, which is a bit like a midfielder in football. We kind of control the tempo of the game. And I could score lots of points, but I get far more pleasure learning where do you like to catch the ball? Where on the floor? Do you like it off a bounce pass? Do you like it as a chest pass? Do I need to make eye contact? So when are you at your best depends on how I serve you the ball. So that's a common thread through my private life. And when I looked at my business life, the same thread was there. It was always, how do you create the environment where other people can flourish? And that's whether I was in a mentor position, whether I was in a team leader position in a contact center, or in my more senior roles that I was doing at the big blue chips. And that thread carries on today. I do exactly what I've done for the last sort of 25, 30 years, or you could say nearly 50 years if you include my life.
Wow.
Makes it more authentic for me.
Now that's something I can really relate to, because I again, if you look at my CV, I've done fashion styling, I've done coaching, and I've necessarily been an entrepreneur, freelance, a lot of it. But everything that I've done has been about putting somebody else in the spotlight. Is about, like you say, setting the table for somebody else to shine. It was never about me. The things that I've done have never been about me. It's about helping others find the best of themselves, which is why I then decided, you know what, I'll be a coach, and I was doing that well before COVID and well before coaches were everywhere. everywhere.
Yes. Yes.
And it's one thing that's really resonated with me is coaching as opposed to doing therapy. I've done a lot of work around therapy and psychology. I have no interest in being a psychologist or a therapist to that end, because I like coaching, like you say. For me, it is being able to pass on skills and really help people find what resonates and work for them with regards to what helps them move forward. So I can completely get on board with that. And that leads us really nicely into values, because, and I think this is a really interesting talking point, because over the last few years, certainly since COVID here, dare I say the word, everybody got on to values. What are your values? What are your core values? What are your company values? And it seems to be a little bit of a buzz, like authenticity and all these other things. And I'd like to kind of set the record straight here. So when I did my values, I did them as personal values. And because my business is, I'm a one-man band, they can relate to my business because it's the way that I do business. It is the way that I will work with a client, for instance. But in a bigger business, and I've been employed, and I've seen these in bigger businesses, what I've seen is there's a definite mismatch between the values that are extended to, say, customers and clients versus the values that are extended to colleagues and people at different levels in the hierarchical structure of a company. So with that, I'm going to pass that over to you and let us share your insights into values, because I know when we had this conversation before, it was massively interesting. I really enjoyed it. So off you go.
Well, there's an awful lot to unpack there, and I really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully I can recant some of it. One of the things that you said that I'll come back to later on is it's how I do business. And as a one man band or one woman band, your clients can feel and live and breathe your values with you because nobody else is having to share them. They are you. The challenge I have with values as a whole is they are, in organizations, they are often aspirational. And what I mean by that is if an organization says we have a value of we are customer obsessed, then to me it sends a signal that you're not currently customer obsessed. It's something you're aspiring to be, which becomes more problematic when you have other kind of nouns around integrity, for example. And the first thing is they kind of tell me what you're not. But the second thing that's kind of more important is values are held up as some kind of bastion of perfection. And for me, values are not, they're contextual. So I have a value that's around dependability. And personal values tend to be formed in your kind of formative years, prepubescent and formative years, based on your environment, slightly based on your genetics. And my environment, I was mummy's special boy. I was the eldest of 5. I was told there was nothing you can't do. You should try everything. Don't listen to anybody else. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you do what you want. And that's instilled values in me around dependability and not having to rely on other people. And being a one-man band, trying my hand at a bit of web design and a bit of content creation and a bit of podcasting, all these things, I have no qualms at all in rolling my sleeves up and just giving it a go. However, on the flip side, it makes it incredibly hard for me to ask for help. So the value itself is not good or bad. It depends the situation you're in. If I'm in a situation where I'm doing something and I physically can't do it, I'm not capable of doing it, then I need to be able to ask for help or show vulnerability. Yeah. And at the same time, if I ask for help, I really, really need help. So if it's not given, I find myself having a physiological response to it. I get literally angry. The same as if people don't say please and thank you. That's another one of my values. I find myself getting disproportionately affected with my physiological response, and that's unreasonable. That's not always a good thing. So values tell me what you're not, and they're not good all the time. It depends on the circumstances, the context that you're in.
Yes, so I completely not relate to that. So one of my values is integrity, and it becomes from, again, I can trace it back to how I grew up. I grew up, unfortunately, with a lot of emotional neglect from an alcoholic stepmother, and I was always felt like I was lied to. So therefore, integrity for me was a big thing. If I feel like you're lying to me, I can't have a relationship with you. I find it really impossible because it just puts a barrier up. But at the same point, it means I've got to be equally vulnerable and honest with you in the right context. But that's not necessarily a business value, it's a relationship value, like you say. But it's really interesting because I do study body language and behaviour and all these kind of things. And one thing that comes out of everything that I learn in that is leakage. And the things that we say that we think that we're saying, like you said, if a business has a value of excellent customer service, it means they know that they've not. It's not, it means that that's what they do. And that's language leakage as far as my self-education in that area understands that. And I find that really interesting as how we actually use language and what that really tells people about us. And if we go back into NLP, and this is how I was described, NLP a long time ago was described to me, is the brain doesn't understand negatives. So if it says you're not customer service, it means you are customer service. If you say, well, we aspire to be customer service, it probably means you're probably not. you know, and the brain science seems to switch it over, which I find really interesting. But I think these are useful things for us to start to realise, so that when we are communicating, we understand how clarity is formed and how perception is formed then by potentially the other person that we're communicating with. That's my take on it. Like I said, I'm not the psychologist. I do this for fun.
Speaking as a human, not necessarily as a psychologist, I completely agree, because we don't live in a vacuum. We don't operate and think in a vacuum. And the understanding things like, I'll give you an example. So through COVID, my partner and I put on a huge amount of weight because the only thing that was still working was Deliveroo. And if I have a core value of honesty and she asks me, how do I look? Do I stay true to my core value and say, you know, you're beautiful to me, you have put on a few pounds, whatever it might be, and be hurtful? Or do I bend my value for the kind of greater good and to make sure that the relationship stays positive? And organizations struggle doing this, to the point where you'll see behaviors where the values become weaponized. So I worked with an organization who had a value of speed, and the reason for that value was that they determined that customers are more impressed by how quickly you resolve than by the manner in which you resolve. That was their belief. But then when fundamental basic stuff kind of went wrong, as it does in life. So, you know, I forgot my password for my laptop and there's a 24-hour turnaround from IT. I thought we operated with speed around here. And suddenly these things that you've held up as a paragon of what we're about in a good way become almost a figurative stick to beat each other with.
Yeah.
And to go back to your point about leakage, my consultancy, we run off 9 mantras. Number 1 is happy bees make tasty honey. If you look after the people,
I know that one.
Yeah, but number 3 is culture leaves evidence, and it's like a relationship in that I can't just tell you I love you. I can't tell you how I feel about you. The same as you can't tell someone about the culture. Your people show us. It's in the minutiae, it's in the little details that show that you care, that you love somebody. And values are very similar. You can't just have something written on the wall, as articulate and beautiful as it may be. The behavior leaks, the culture leaves evidence, and I can see that. Everybody can see and feel it, even if they don't quite know what they're looking for. The same as if you were to go on a date with somebody who says they're this way, you can sense that they're not. You know, if the talk doesn't match the walk, we have natural innate ways of kind of spotting that stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting human trait that we all have this ability to understand the difference between words and actions and see when, even if we can't say it out loud or articulate it necessarily, something in us can feel when something just isn't quite right. And it is the incongruence between behaviour and language. And that for me, in all the things that I've looked at over the years, that for me is probably the biggest thing that stands out, is that congruence there. And when there's a lack of it, it speaks volumes. And that's really interesting, because again, I think once you realize that, it changes a game for a person and then potentially an organization. But if you don't realize that, you suffer it all the time. And you're not even understanding what it is that you're suffering all the time. And it does, like you say, it affects the culture, it permeates into that, because suddenly that becomes the thing that we're all right with, even though subconsciously we're not all right with it at all. So then we go home stressed, thinking, well, it seems all right, but it don't feel all right. And then you're in a massive incongruence with yourself, and that becoming a daily thing becomes another daily stressor that then affects everything else around well-being. And that is the way that you interact with your line manager, with your colleagues, with people on different sites, with customers. Again, I just, this is one of those things that I wish people knew or understood. There were a way to share that knowledge in a way that's definitely a positive use of that knowledge as well, which is cool. And this brings us on to behaviour quite nicely, and we're going to talk about the big five. I love conversations around the big five. I first noticed this from Jordan Peterson. Not a fan of Jordan Peterson. He talks in circles, he's very flowery, and I don't think he's quite as clever as he thinks he is. However, he does allude to some stuff that I'm like, okay, I'll go and look into that and see if there's anything to it. And the big five is one of those things for me that every psychologist that I've spoken to seems to use the big five. So, and I know you fit under that for me, so I'm going to let you explain the big five and kind of take on that part of the conversation.
So it does tie in nicely, because words matter. And the big five, or the five-factor model, is the currently commonly associated model with personality. There are other models as well, but this one has an awful lot of research behind it, and we're always adding to it because we don't quite understand what personality is. But it's the best that we have at the moment. And what it does is it looks at around 30 different parts of personality, what we call facets, and then rolls those up into kind of five main sort of families, which we have as OCEAN is the acronym, which cover dimensions of how open people are to experience, their level of extroversion, their level of emotional stability or neuroticism, their agreeableness, and their conscientiousness. And the studies came about from studying language. I mean, the background of it was there's about 17,000 words that were looked at, and they were categorized into, do they fit into openness or into extroversion or into neuroticism, etc. So it's interesting that we've kind of come full circle, that what you say matters, and that's how we identify and currently categorize different types of personalities. The reason that a lot of therapists, a lot of counsellors, and a lot of psychologists focus on it is because language matters. Language is important. What you say, how you process the world, some of that information is conveyed in language, even without us really being aware of it. And if you can have a little bit of a glimpse into how people talk and how they make sense of the world, then you can also help either to modify your own approaches so you can connect better, or you can also predict to a degree how they may react in certain situations as well, which is incredibly helpful if you're helping people to overcome therapeutic interventions, or whether you're overcome via coaching, etc. as well.
Yeah.
So is there anything particular around it that you're most interested in? Maybe we can delve into that.
I'm interested in all sorts of things around this, and we ain't got time for it today, but I'm sure I will pick your brains at another point, because like I say, I can't get enough of this stuff. It's brilliant. But the one thing so I'm going to ask you a quick question actually before I go into that. Body language. What is your take? And this is from my own thing. I'm going a bit off on a little bit of a tangent here. What is your take on body language? And the reason I ask is I believe body language matters, because from my background in personal training, understanding how to look at the body and understand potentially what's not working and what's not going right in there, I get the kind of personal trainer lens of that, so that I can possibly see someone's had an injury, they've probably had the injury a while, they've kind of compensated their movement as a result, and it's my job to help them kind of put that back together and be and help them to reduce their pain, etc., so that they can train and do whatever they want to do. So that's one perspective of it. But body language sometimes, and again, experts will argue here that actually your body language being incongruent or can be faked to be congruent, i.e. you can fake tears, you can fake sadness. But I'm just wondering, how well can someone fake sadness? Because there's a difference between actual empathy and cognitive empathy, but you can hide actual empathy and you can fake cognitive empathy. So again, body language, I know it's there and there as a pseudoscience, but I think it's a massively interesting conversation and one that shouldn't be openly dismissed.
So it is an interesting area. My personal view is that all models are flawed, but that doesn't mean they're not useful. And it's the same whether it's something that's been studied as much as personality or gravity. You know, we don't even have a unified theory of why things act the way they do between the kind of macro world and the micro world. So with language, whether that's body language or verbal language, for me, we have the same kind of thing, that if I'm judging who you are as an individual based solely on the words that come out of your mouth, it is an incomplete picture. If I'm also judging you as an individual based on how you cross your legs or whether your toes are pointing towards the door, then that is also at best an incomplete picture. The combination of the two might give you more accuracy, or more likely it will give you more points of debate and discussion. And for me, psychology isn't about finding agreement. In fact, you will never find psychologists agree on anything. In fact, if you read an article that says psychologists agree that, ignore it. It's a rubbish article because we don't. So what's more important is, does it start a conversation? If I've noticed that you are sitting in a certain way, you're more upright, or your breathing's changed, etc., then if there are other pieces of evidence or other pieces of data that make you feel that something is happening, is the data accurate, valid, and reliable? Or is it tarnished by some of your own biases, of which we have about 170 identified ones? Well, the only way to find out is ask them. You don't have to do personality assessments and psychometrics and polygraphs and stuff. You can always just talk to the person and see. My background, I mentioned, I play basketball. I'm short. You can't tell on this, but this is about actual size. As a result, there's a lot more miles on my hips and legs, etc., that will affect my physiology. So even though I may have very comparable viewpoints or personality traits as somebody else, I may stand different, pose different. Sciatica is just part of my life now. Am I going to be judged differently? Am I going to be dismissive because of that? I don't know. I don't maintain eye contact very much, but that's not because I'm introverted. I'm an extrovert. It's not because I'm neurodiverse. It's because the way I make sense of the world is pulling abstract things together and spotting patterns. And as a result, and you'll see it in this interview, my eyes are dancing constantly. It doesn't mean that I'm shy, or do you know what I mean? You can't just look at one data point and go, "Oh, that's it. They must have Pisces."
I completely get that. I feel that my eyes very much do the same thing, and I very much do the same thing. And there's a lot of reasons as to why that could be the thing. But I do remember being a little bit younger and saying, "But if you can't look someone straight in the eye, they must be lying to you," which obviously is a load of nonsense. But these are the things we learn as we grow up. Sorry.
Being the eldest of five, my mum used to say, when you lie, your tongue turns blue. So she used to line all us kids up. If something happened, stick your tongue out, right?
Yeah.
And she wasn't looking for the tongue; she was looking for the hesitation. But being older, I spotted that straight away. So I'd be loud and proud. I know my tongue is not blue because there's mirrors in the house for starters. So the behaviour that she's expecting to see based on the body language isn't necessarily the case. So people can fake. Yeah. What's more interesting to me is, why are they faking? Is it, we assume that faking is for nefarious reasons. They're trying to hide something that's bad.
But yeah, we assume deception.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that will wear personas and will fake because the power of belonging is more powerful than the being an individual. So how do I fit in and make sure I'm not going to be ostracized from the tribe? And you'll see this in the corporate world that people who are, for example, technically introverted and prefer reflective ideas and spotting risks and things like this, pretend to be overly social and garrulous and then go home every night exhausted from the mental cognition load required.
Yes.
Um, and that intrigues me just as much as the what's the scenario, what's the environmental causes that make you want to mask, that make you want to put on a persona or fake,
I think that's
camouflage.
really interesting because I'm what's being described, I'm not going to label myself here as an extroverted introvert. In other words, I'm very good at having time on my own, and I'm really good at that. And I'm not massively social. So, but when I am social, I'm quite outgoing in a social group. Bit like, a conversation here. Seem massive, outgoing and quite gregarious, all that kind of thing. But for me, it's just a way of making connection. It's a way of being interested. It's not for me, it's not a mask for me. Whether another psychologist would agree with that or not, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a mask to me, but I do get this idea that we all do wear masks in different places, i.e. we all have a different persona in different places. But it is about that safety mechanism for me, as far as I understand it. How do I feel safe in this environment? What do I need to do to feel safe so I can get on in this environment? Which is, from a behavior point of view, I don't touch too much on stuff like that, but I certainly do. I put posts out about it quite a lot because, again, these things being understood for the positive as opposed to just the negative that we get thrown at us all the time, I think is a very useful thing to know. And it brings us nicely onto the ABCDEs that you introduced me to of behaviour and having difficult conversations then as well with regards to the masking or not masking, or what's authenticity, what's not authenticity, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, your personality is not just yours. We like to think we're special little unique snowflakes, but it's influenced by the state. We have our traits that are innate to us. We have the state that we're in. So what's happened to you? What mental condition are you in? Have you just crashed your car? Because this conversation will be very different. And then you also have the influence of the social norms of the groups that we're in as well. So the way you speak with your parents will be different to the way you speak with a client, will be different to the way you speak with your friends. It doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. It's that we mold and adapt. And so our environment plays on that. So even though the big five is kind of accepted model at the moment, even that doesn't account for this nature nurture. It's the environment that affects us. And in terms of behaviors, you then have added, or our interpretation of other people rather, you then have added muddiness in the water around what you've witnessed and then your own biases and how you've processed it.
Yeah.
And what the ABCDEs are is a way of looking at a situation and kind of being dispassionate or emotionally disconnected to it when you see something that you don't agree with. And the example I use is there's lots of examples, but one might be somebody that's driving in the middle lane of a motorway. And you can only see their A's and B's. You can see their actions and you can see their behaviors. And as a result, they're an asshole. They're driving in the middle lane, they're blocking traffic because you can only judge them on the A's and B's. However, if you were to do exactly the same thing, you would be showing exactly the same action and behavior. You're driving in the middle lane, but you were able to rationalize it away based on cognitive, which is a C. So what are you thinking at the time in terms of, I feel safer in this lane. I've got a little bit of wiggle room in case, I veer out a lane or there's a pothole or it's raining or anything. So you can rationalize it away. We don't know the C of the other person. We also don't know the D, the desire. What's their motivation at the moment? It could be that they're recovering from a crash recently and actually they feel more safe being in that. And actually they're driving at 70 miles an hour. Nobody should be overtaking or undertaking them. So rationally it makes sense as well. And then the E is the emotional state that they're in. What's happened to them at the moment? What physiological response are they having as well? we're not cognizant of any of that information when we're making judgments. You see somebody not putting their trolley back, or not saying please and thank you, or talking to somebody in a very short, sharp way that you don't agree with because it violates your values. It's natural for us to just go, asshole. So
So it is.
that's why, yeah, that's why it is. And we love affirmation. We love, our confirmation bias will go looking for, I've made a snap judgment that they're an asshole, and now I will look for more evidence. And your reticular activation system flags it. Look, here's another data point that validates you were right to think they're an asshole.
Do you know what? I had
And
the very same thing with my partner a couple of years ago on the motorway, where someone was literally driving in the middle lane at 70 miles an hour, just like you said. There was no need for him to be there. And I was like, I can't get, well, there were people zooming on the other side of it, so I couldn't overtake him, but he wouldn't move out of the way, and I didn't want to undertake him. And like the rules of the motorway are, it's an overtaking lane. So if you can pull in, let other people pass. And my partner said, well, you know what? He's only going at the speed limit. I'm like, yeah, but this is not how you use the road. So we literally had an argument over this exact thing. Which is hilarious,
you see
but
it
it's
in
true.
more.
It's so true. He wasn't arguing in favor. He was only arguing in favor of the legality. He's just sticking to the speed limit. I was arguing in favor of the fact that, he may be sticking to the speed limit, and that's absolutely fine. But if I want to go a bit quicker, he's stopping me.
Yeah,
And
you
it
see
should
it
be
in more
really pulling in
simple.
rather than holding up traffic, because that's the laws of the motorway, etc., etc. But again, yeah, hilarious.
But that might come back to, so in the big five you have a dimension called agreeableness. So agreeableness, people that are lower agreeableness will be very kind of evidence-based, factual, perfunctory. I'm not going to sugar the pill. A plus B equals C. Deal with it. At the other end, you have people that are far more warm and caring and maybe people-pleasing. When you combine that with conscientiousness, which is about structure, so high conscientiousness correlates with things like to-do lists and organization, and as well as things like doing the right thing and following rules. Low conscientiousness, which is me, is a little bit more, we don't read the instructions before we make things. The deadline is the initiator of any action. In fact, if I start work early, the work caliber is less. I actually am better when it's the 11th hour.
So before we answer the question, I just wanted to say thank you to Danny for spending some time with us and sharing his expertise. So thank you, Danny, for joining us. So the final question is mental health first aid really useful in the workplace? So before we just go on, please like, subscribe and share and support the channel, especially if you found this useful. I appreciate all the support we can get. My role is to help create workplaces that are functionable for everybody and help us see multiple perspectives so that we can all do better. It's not about pointing the finger. Without further ado, let's go back in and answer that final question.
Cool. Right, so then, Danny, to wrap up what we've been talking about here with regards to mental health first aid and workplace psychology and how personalities and things work, where are we standing on mental health first aid, providing environments for well-being, and who has what responsibility, and where is mental health first aid possibly useful and possibly just a tick box exercise?
And that's a great question. There are some organizations out there that do support mental health well. However, it's become something of it's an in vogue subject. So as a result, there are some organizations that aren't giving it the investment that it requires, even though their hearts are in the right place. So for example, things like setting up mental health first aiders can be really helpful, but you also have to have the systems around them to make sure that they're supported. Often people that volunteer for these roles have come with their own experiences, their own trauma, and if they are being asked to create interventions with individuals, what support is there for them post-intervention? Or is it just, as you said, a tick box exercise to say, look, we've got mental health first aiders in our organization?
Yeah, and the interesting question there is, and we've spoken about this, is people that put themselves forward for mental health first aid, yeah, I want to do it, I'm happy to go on that course and do it, I'm really passionate about this, are usually the people who ironically are not the best people for that position. So can you explain why that is?
So whenever there's a decision made, decisions tend to be made either out of passion or trauma. So if you think of it in terms of you are starting a business, people either start a business because I've got a side hustle that I can now monetize and I'm really excited about it and I've got passion for it, or I can do it better than what I'm doing at the moment. My current employer doesn't do what I would do it better if I was on my own. Or I want to completely pivot my life because I'm fed up of the situation or environment, etc. that I'm in. So it's born out of trauma. Generally, the trend for people that want to help others in when it comes to mental health tend to be people that have experienced mental health challenges themselves. So it's admirable that they would want to put themselves forward, and there isn't anything inherently bad in that. What is, though, is if they do not have the support from their peers around them, from the environment around them, from the protocols and processes that their employer puts in place, then you're almost putting people in harm's way to take on emotional load and cognitive load from other people that they're not fully trained in how to deal with themselves.
Yeah.
And that's
yes, 100%.
the challenge.
Sorry. Yeah, because I think that's a conversation for another day. Yeah, that's a conversation for another day, because that is a big conversation. But I think just highlighting the fact that that is a conversation, all on its own thing, is massively important. Where if employers are coming to look at this, or people in HR do come across this video and they see this, it might just be, a bit of a flag that comes up, and okay, so we need to be aware of this just before we say, so and so wants to be a mental health first aid. So that's one we've got down. We can tick the box, as it were, because I think whilst a lot of things are like tick box exercises, understandably businesses are just busy. They need to get on with their day-to-day running of things, and these are all very new things that have come about in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, if not sooner now, and been kind of catapulted into our psyche, as it were, because of COVID, and all the other things that we've recently been through, and the fact that there's war going on, and then there's loads of stress all over generally. And I think it's just really important that actually we don't get sidetracked into our own little kind of tunnel visions. And I think we do, even the best intentioned people in HR will still do that, because they're only human like the rest of us. and it's as simple as that, so just having some awareness that there's something else around this, and that actually the people to do mental health first aid isn't just about ticking the box, as it were. They need to go through kind of a vetting process, as it were, to make sure that they're in a position where they can handle that themselves, or if they've got support afterwards. There's one thing that I certainly come across, and it's when I do all the studies that I do, and it's leakage. And yes, while we all like to keep things confidential, when we're overwhelmed ourselves, leakage will happen out of, there's no bad intent, there's no gossip, there's not anything else, but leakage will happen, and that's where confidentiality roles can get broken as well. And under GDPR and stuff like that, I think we have to be very, very careful.
I agree, and it is a bit of a minefield for employers and for HR. But there are processes in place that we're quite familiar with that translate across. So, for example, for physical health and physical risk, you have a process under Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which requires RAMs, risk assessment and method statements. And this is essentially a matrixed approach to how likely is something to cause harm, potentially cause harm, versus what's the level of harm that it could cause. And that processing, it is well known within organisations. So if they run a fun day, they'll do a RAMS to work out what should the exits be, what's the traffic flow, what's the footfall, should we sell candy floss, is that a choking hazard, and to work out whether they should mitigate risks. Mental health can be approached exactly the same way. What's the risk, what's the likelihood of it happening, and then you can go at it from a more kind of structured tactical approach, rather than we've got some mental health first aiders and that's it, our duty here is done.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think that's a really good place just to wrap this up, so this video doesn't end up going on and on forever. We both know, as we have done in the past, that we can talk forever and go off laid down a good framework and a good idea between us in this conversation about just making people aware of the other stuff that goes on that maybe perhaps within their professional parameters they possibly wouldn't think about. But there are things that we think about as a norm because for us that's our job.